Well, thank you all for sticking around and having me here. It's a pleasure to be here with the Wyoming Infrastructure Authority. What I thought I would do today is, first of all, I'm going to start off telling you a little bit about what we as an association are all about. And then I'll get into some specifics, some tax facts, give you some updates as far as the recent consensus revenue estimating group estimates, and go through a few more interesting slides, and then end by telling you what my association is looking at as far as bill tracking this particular session. So with that, I'll proceed to tell you a little bit about the Wyoming Taxpayers Association. I worked with this association a great deal over my 32 years with the state. They are an incredible organization and been around since 1937, the oldest of its kind in the United States. And we have peer organizations in other states that do the very same thing that we do, and that is to promote efficient and effective government, what we consider good tax policy, and try to fight like the Dickens to keep bad tax policy from happening. We're a nonprofit 501c4 organization. We have a very diverse membership. I think the last count I saw was somewhere around 220 members, and of those members we have some very large organizations. We have some small, more family type organizations. We have corporations, cooperatives, ranchers, legislators, all the way down to the private citizens. And everyone in our organization has a voice. During session, we meet every week and have what's called the Legislative Policy Forum meeting, where we all get together and basically go through the legislation that's being proposed, and we measure it against a document that I will cover in the next slide. I don't know, there's several members of the organization here that have been long time organizations, and they can probably tell you when the Cornerstones of Taxation model was created. It has to go back beyond 10 years ago. But this really makes our job a lot simpler and a lot more focused. And this is a one-page document based on these 5 principles, the 5 listed there. And we have them in a format that actually allows the citizen, allows the legislator, the elected official at all levels of government, allows them to actually test the legislation that they're proposing to see whether or not it measures up to what we consider good tax policy. And I'll tell you, just from track record that we've had over the years, it's pretty much we're pretty much we have a lot of the final say in legislation, and legislators really respect our organization and what we feel about the legislation. And if it passes the muster of the Cornerstones of Taxation, generally, and we support it, generally it will pass. On the other hand, if it doesn't and we oppose it, it stands a good chance that it's not going to pass. So this is a very good model. My next slide here, we want to talk a little bit about the visions here with state government. And this study, the Wyoming Tax Reform 2000, this was a committee that was formed back in the late 90s. Actually, at a time when we were experiencing a lot of the same problems we are today with low mineral pricing. This was an incredible group, and it came up with some very good findings, both on revenue side and expenditures, and how they could prioritize and what was needed and what really wasn't needed. But one of the principles, one of the principal arguments that was made in finding in this committee was that about Wyoming's tax structure, that it is inequitable, it's unstable, and again, because of the one thing that I'm sure that you've heard today spoken about a great deal, our dependency on minerals. It's also inequitable that in the fact that we tax one entity a great deal more than we do other individuals in this state. But our tax structure lacks balance, and one of the biggest things I think here is because we are relying on the extractive industries, we are in essence an income inelastic tax structure, which means that as we bring total personal income up in this state, it really doesn't have that big of an effect on our state revenues. The only thing that really matters to our state revenue coffers is mineral production and strong pricing. And as you can see there, primary tax source, almost 75% when you figure in the state's operating budget as well as K through 12 education. We're looking at about 3/4 of the state's total revenue being generated by the mineral industry. This is just a listing of some of the major sources of revenue in our state, and as you go through those, you can see exactly what I'm talking about. Everything from federal mineral royalties all the way down, coal lease bonus payments, which I'm sure you've heard about today. Major funder, it is the main funding mechanism for school capital construction in our state, and slated to go away here at the end of fiscal year 2017, so just not too far away, at least as long as there's no more coal leases happening. But all the way down, you can see that most all of our revenue sources, including state and local sales tax. People say, well, sales tax, please explain. And actually, mining accounts for 21% of our state sales and use tax collections. Actually, sales tax collections, excuse me. It's the second largest industry in terms of those sales tax collections. When it comes to use tax, mining accounts for 32% of our use tax collections, and it's the first largest top industry in terms of the use tax collections in the state. I put this chart in here just to show you, to illustrate really who pays the taxes in our state. This is the property tax classes for, in terms of the tax assessments that are made. You see minerals and mine products are taxed at 100% of fair market value. This is just an incredible inequity here, because you go down all the way down to 11.5% of assessed value for industrial, and then commercial and residential people, folks pay 9.5% of assessed valuation. So, you know, when you think about a 1 mil tax levy that's imposed, or 1 or 2 mil levy that's imposed for a special district in a county, at the residential level, that really doesn't amount to a hill of beans for most of us. But if you're a large corporation with an assessed valuation in the hundreds of millions or even billions, that becomes a major impact on your bottom line. I wanted to put this chart in here because this really shows the unevenness, if you will, of our wealth here in the state. You have 3 counties, Campbell, Sublette, and Sweetwater County, that make up 18% of our population. Only 18% of our population, yet they make up 50% of our state's assessed valuation. Conversely, Laramie and Natrona counties, right here, You can see those two in pretty uneven level there compared to the other three. But they make up 30% of our state's population, and yet they only have 11% of our state's total assessed valuation. This is just a chart to show you why mineral production is important. Every year, the Tax Foundation, Washington, D.C. think tank, they do an in-depth analysis of the states to determine who has the lowest household tax burden in the country and who is indeed probably the most business-friendly tax environment. And Wyoming always comes out typically on top, or certainly a close second. Mineral industry makes up over a third of the state's gross domestic product, and in current level employment, it's around 8%. In terms of our operating budget, and by that I mean state's general fund and budget reserve accounts, which are the two primary funding accounts for general operations, minerals make up about 2/3 of that total revenue. And you can see going down through there from mineral severance taxes all the way down through the investment income accounts, the kind of money that it generates for our state. I like this pie chart, and I don't know if many of you can see it, but really I want to highlight where our property tax revenue really originates. And if you look here, over 61% of our property tax comes from mineral production, mineral companies. And you can see residential is way down there at 18%, and it just goes down from there. In terms of where it's distributed, I told you minerals are the primary funder of K through 12, and yet this is a good illustration here. Almost 70% of the property tax revenue goes to fund K through 12 education in our state. Now, the Consensus Revenue Estimating Group, it goes by the acronym CRAIG. And this is the official, provides the original official revenue forecast for the governor and the legislature. And it meets to do its formal revenue forecast each year in October. And then it will meet again 3 months later in January to make any revisions as necessary. Well, in October, the CRAIG met, and we as an association and certainly others in the industry, just in reviewing the assumptions for mineral price and production that the CRAIG was using, we were wondering really what they were thinking about at the time they were making the forecast. And as you can see in October, they were forecasting for calendar year 2015, $40, and this is for oil. For 2016, $45, and 2017, $50. And so when you take up the state's fiscal year, which starts July 1st and runs through June 30th of each year, you have 6 months of each calendar year. And so you can kind of make your own assumption there, given what we've been experiencing over time, and determine what, your opinion about the October forecast. And it was pretty lofty, we thought. So figuring that they'd come back in 3 months later in January of 2016 and make some serious downward adjustments, it really didn't happen all that much. And as you can see in January for 2015, still forecasting $40, $42 for 16, and $50. At the same time, in this area that I've circled over here, you can see that the January year-to-date West Texas Intermediate price was sitting at, the average was $31. So it's quite a disparity from from their forecast level. And then if you consider the discount that Wyoming producers realize over the West Texas intermediate price, it's usually about between $10 and $15 off that. You can see that they're way off that forecast level. Natural gas, again, if in January they're sitting at $2.75 per MCF in 15, $2.85 in 16, and $3 in 2017. Yet the January Opal price, and this I believe is higher than what it is now, but January Opal price was $2.27. So you look again at that comparison of the forecast levels to where they are. And some might say, you know, oh, what is that? Maybe 50 cents off that amount, 50, 60 cents off that amount. That's no big deal. I'll show you in the next chart. Coal, same scenario. They're forecasting $13.50 a ton through that short-term forecast horizon. And the Powder River Basin average through January was $10.07. So off about $3. This chart really typically gets people's attention a little bit more than others. This shows really how sensitive our revenues are to those price changes. And certainly with coal, if they are off $1 per ton, and it works plus or minus, it can affect our mineral streams in Wyoming in the neighborhood of $50 to $51 million. Natural gas, a lot more significant because of its total significance in the overall revenue scheme. But $1 per MCF change amounts to about $189, $190 million. So just figure, going back to that last chart, for every dime change that they were off, it's about $19 million bucks, give or take. Crude oil not as significant in the overall picture for revenue change, just because of its lower significance in the overall revenue scheme. These figures were based off of the 2014 numbers. So I imagine their numbers and their significance have changed pretty significant, but not enough to really worry about. This pretty much holds true. And that was on an annual basis as well. So the overall effect of everything, when the Craig met in October and they set their forecast levels down, we all knew that there were going to be downward revisions coming in January. But these particular numbers here, the 160 million and the 419 million, after they set their forecast in October, these were the budget shortfalls that they were projecting. The $160 million were just to get us through this biennium. So this is the fiscal year 2015-16 biennium. The governor was looking at a $159.9 million shortfall. So there's the 160. When you add in the fiscal year 2017-2018, the biennium that they're working the budget on now, you can see that it was sitting at in October, $419 million. So that was bad enough. Well, then they came in January with those forecast assumptions I just showed you, and realized that we were, just to get through this biennium, it was going to take another $32 million off the table for just this biennium, and another 46.4 off the table for the next biennium. The total effects of those two are circled right here, and the total for those 3 years sits right around $660 million that we're short in revenue. Now, that's significant in and of itself, but it comes far from explaining the severity of our problem, because this is just for the operations side of state government. This is for state agencies. If you factor in K through 12 education, this number goes up, another close to 700 million in shortage. So you're in total effect, you're probably looking at a 1.2 million billion dollar shortfall over the next 3 years, given the current situation. Now that could all turn around if mineral prices were to come back. And you know, I've been through many a downturn, and that's exactly what happens. That Tax Reform 2000 study, again, a very comprehensive revenue and expenditure study, but it never got fully implemented because mineral prices came back very strong, and so that product was shelved on the in people's offices and never really got utilized. So we certainly hope that would be the scenario for us in the future. Not likely, however. So this is a comparison of the revenues, and this is just the state's discretionary income, the general fund, and the budget reserve accounts. Budget reserve account is like a savings or a suffix account for the general fund, which is the state's checking account. Both of those are spent from each time, and they'll spend that down, with the exception of the budget reserve in allowing for a statutory minimum that they have to leave in there. Now, you can see that we're experiencing the inverse of what we experienced from about 2003-04 all the way up to 11-12, somewhere in that ballpark, 13-14. Things are on the downward trajectory right now. This particular chart wanted to show you that the amount of growth. Now, this is where I took over in my former office in state government. We were facing, again, the similar situation, looking at about a 500 million shortfall for the coming biennium when we were in this area here. And with coal bed methane coming on, we actually got into an energy boom for natural gas, and it just took off. Revenues grew exponentially, but so did our spending levels. In fact, appropriations grew by over 2.5 times in that, what would that have been, like a six-year period between 2003 and 4 all the way up to 7 and 8. Huge growth. And as we all know, in state government, appropriations are pretty much a one-way ratchet in one sense, because it requires programs to be cut. It requires employees to be laid off to really have a dramatic effect on state budgets. And the likelihood of us making up that shortfall by just cuts alone, it's not going to happen, quite frankly. And I also want to point out right here, this for our current biennium in 15-16, that level would be down significantly from where it is right now, had it not been for significant capital gains that the state treasurer realized over the last couple of years. We don't have that rabbit in the hat again for this year, unfortunately. So this stage of the ball game, and that would have dropped it down, probably down to this level because the capital gains were in the ballpark of around $300 million. So it was a nice little nest egg to have to get us through that the last couple of years. Just some tax facts that I think everyone should realize. We rank as one of the highest in the nation in per capita state and government revenues and expenditures. Yet we have no corporate or personal taxes, and we have very relatively low property taxes. But yet we have the lowest household tax burden in the country. And that works both in our favor and against us. I know when I was running the state's economic analysis division, during the times of our huge budget surpluses, we were the heroes and the envy of most of the other states in the country. But when we find ourselves in the situation of today where we're in a huge budget shortfall, then all the critics come out. And typically it's other economists just saying, you know, your lack of diversification in your tax structure and your dependency on minerals is really an overly simplistic model, and you're more of a colony, you know, and so we get into these criticisms anyway. One of my favorite graphs, and speaking of my former division where I worked, this was produced by the Economic Analysis Division. This really says it all for Wyoming, and what this graph shows is for a three-person, and this is an average family in Wyoming, a three-person family with an income of $60,000, owning a home valued at around $160,000. So they're owning the home. This shows you what the average family will pay in terms of their total personal tax collections, and this is everything from retail, gasoline, cigarettes, alcohol, vehicle registration, and the property tax component down here, which is the largest of those tax payments, versus what they realize in terms of their public service costs. And if you look, they have, in this scenario, they'd have one child in our K through 12 system, and that is valued at around $6,700. I venture to say it's more than that now, since this was in 2014. But you can see they pay just under $3,000, yet they utilize services valued at around $30,000. And that disparity between those two is made up by, you guessed it, our mineral taxation. And interestingly, most of our mineral taxes, because the companies are typically headquartered out of state, it becomes a nice luxury for the state of Wyoming as an export tax. Really, we export our tax burden out of state. And a lot of people don't realize that particularly when you run across them in the coffee shop and they're telling you, when I tell them I work for the Wyoming Taxpayers Association, of course they have no idea what that means, but they just think, oh, keep my taxes down. I pay too many taxes as it is. Well, again, I always bring them back to that 100% of assessed valuation versus 9.5% of valuation, what most of us pay. And I said, unless you're a mineral company in this state, you really have nothing to really complain about in terms of taxes. So I'm going to shift gears now and talk to you a little bit about what we're following in this budget session, and it's a way different animal, as some of you realize here, in terms of this budget shortfall and really how it the effect that it has on our legislature and their mentality here. This particular year, instead of just having one general appropriations bill, which is always in a mere concept, they'll introduce the identical bills in both houses to work. But this year, they've gone beyond that because of the complexity of this budget and the issues that are being that need to be addressed. Now they have 4 other what they call mirror bills that they'll be discussing. And so instead of just the general appropriations, now they have a local government appropriation where they're debating on in the neighborhood of $90 million for local governments. School facilities appropriations. Again, this is a huge issue here because what they're looking at doing this particular budget session, because we don't have enough money or a secured revenue stream for school facilities, they're looking at dipping into the state's rainy day account, which is you probably heard it, it's either the LSRA, the LISRA, or the Legislative Stabilization Reserve account. Rainy day account works for me on this, but there's $1.8 billion sitting in that account, and the governor's recommendations were to tap into, I think, utilize somewhere in the ballpark of $450 million out of this account, some of which going to school facilities. At the end of the fiscal year 2017-2018, it's projected right now, after the joint appropriation recommendations came out, that they will exhaust all of the savings that they've amassed over the years from COLE's bonus monies and federal mineral royalties in excess of $675 million. And that will totally wipe out the savings for schools, and there's no revenue, no alternative revenue source at this particular time for school facilities. Abandoned mine land funds, that's another real nice nest egg that we got, and thanks to our congressional leaders back in Washington, they were able to get this wrapped up or secured for Wyoming, and it's going to amount to hundreds of millions of dollars for the next decade. And the state-funded capital construction needs, this is above and beyond really what they're doing at this with the capital renovation. This is just for state buildings, state agency construction here. These are some of the bills that the Wyoming taxpayers are following right now. We have been actively engaged with a task force that was put into place last year in the legislative session called the Mineral Tax Task Force. And what this group is engaged in doing right now is really to look at the mineral taxation structure in Wyoming, which is deemed the most complicated in the country. And the complications that this tax structure has for our mineral companies are very vast. And I mean, I've learned a lot just in my brief time with the taxpayers and in being engaged with all parties from state, county, and certainly the mineral partners. Just learning the complexities and the problems that exist in our tax structure. So this is a very worthwhile group. They've got a hell of a mountain to climb. They have one more year after this one to, or one more year really of in existence, and so they're hoping to get some major changes happening. But one of the bills that came out was this monthly payment of ad valorem tax on mineral production. I won't go into what that's really all about, but it was a fundamental change in the way that companies would pay their ad valorem or gross products tax. And it did fail, and it failed for several reasons, but again, won't cover that right now. But Senate File 21 is another bill that came out of the Mineral Tax Task Force, and that's just to really clean up some of the language. Any of you that have gone through any of our statutes, really, that have been in existence for a long time, you just go through there and you think, gosh, why doesn't somebody come in here and clean this up a little bit and get rid of some of the arcane language? And that's exactly what this bill did, and it looks like it's going through without any hitches. House Bill 8, property tax or property assessment test rules. We're supporting this, and this again is another, I'll call it an efficiency measure to take care of unneeded services that the county assessors are required to perform right now. We're supporting that. House Bill 42, the fuel tax revenue restriction. This just basically sets, the legislature has put their foot down that the revenues raised from the fuel taxes cannot be spent on anything other than highway construction and maintenance. So it's a good bill. Special districts, the House Bill 53 organizes a special districts task force. We're supporting that, and again, as I indicated earlier, the special districts that exist in Wyoming are over 600, and I think they're like 630 or 40 going right now. Each one of those has roughly about a 2 to 3 mil assessment on there. And as I pointed out, from a residential standpoint, they're pretty much, they go unnoticed. But for large companies, those are the people who pay the bulk of the taxes in our state. Big deal. We've always been concerned at the taxpayers about the transparency and the accountability of special districts, so we are in support of this task force. Senate File 68, budget shortfall measures, we're monitoring that because of some of the complexities that are in this particular bill. It seems to be moving through, and I think now it's moved over to the House. And then lastly, for the interim study, we think that it's because the legislature really has not talked much about how they plan to fund in the long term school facilities and other state government operations as we go forward with the battle against coal and the potential to lose coal revenues. Coal has provided us, the state of Wyoming, a very steady revenue stream over time, whereas oil and natural gas and the volatility of those two commodities, the revenues have been all over the place and really are what's causing our revenue shortfall right now. But coal has always been a steady player, and the threat of it being significantly reduced or possibly even going away in the future is a big time concern to all of us, and I think the legislature needs to really look at how they plan to keep the state afloat for the years ahead. So we would like to see them either take that tax reform 2000 report and dust it off, do some updating on it, or undertake another comprehensive look at revenue and expenditures. So, and that pretty much takes care of my presentation. I think there's none of us that really like to pay taxes, but again, that's what keeps our highways and going, and keeps us safe in the community with law enforcement and everything else. This is kind of what our legislature shoots to achieve anyway, if they can. But I don't see any tax increases being proposed or coming about anytime soon. So again, the challenge is before them on how they plan to proceed in keeping the state operating in the future. So with that, the Wyoming Taxpayers Association thanks you. I thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. I know this is a tough thing to have to look at after lunch, and or any time really, but our organization is always in the trenches and our work's never done. So with that, I appreciate your time, and have a good afternoon.
Any questions for Buck? Bob?
Buck, you may have talked about it, I don't recall hearing it, but you mentioned the $300 million that's been set aside for the capital renovation.
I didn't actually, Bob, but I did mention that it's aside from the state capital construction mirror bill that's in effect right now. The state undergoing really a complete overhaul of the state capital, slated at around $300 million. That was a good debate in the Senate this morning on that very issue, because there's some skeptics out there as to whether or not $300 million is going to be the true bottom line by the time they're done. The scope of the project seems to be ever changing, and today's discussion was on the expansion of the program to build classrooms and accommodations really for tourism in our capital, and whether or not that was included in the $300 million and whether they'd be able to accomplish it. But this is a 3-year process, or scheduled for 3 years, and currently the legislature and elected officials, everybody that's been in the Capitol, have been displaced. And our legislature is taking place at the Jonah facility out east, which I think is, it's remarkable that they were able to find a venue that can accommodate such an undertaking. But yeah, did that?
I guess what I was getting at is, I think it's important people know that the $300 million is not an appropriation that has come up immediately.
Right.
Rather, the money has been saved over like a 10-year period to pay for it. So
Yeah.
a lot of people are thinking, why continue with that renovation at such a high cost when minimal revenues are happening?
Absolutely, and I mean, that was another piece of the debate. You've got longtime legislators that are questioning why we're doing such an undertaking during such a turbulent time in our state's financing. But yeah, Bob's exactly right. This is a project that's been in the plans for a long time, and they've set funds aside for it. But it's the largest single capital construction item ever in the history of Wyoming, with the and I mean even in building the Capitol in the first place, you know. So yeah, Tim.
What are they going to look at in regards to the Tax 2000 format? Are they going to dust that off, take another look at it? Are they starting to plan in that regard? Do you have any idea about that?
We really don't, Tim. And the question, if people didn't hear that, is what are the plans, the legislature's plans for a study similar to the Tax Reform 2000? Last year, there was a proposal, a bill proposed that was called Vision 2020, which would have undertaken a lot of this study in hand. But it failed, and I think it was just really the timing of it all. In the reason that it did fail. I think certainly the complexion of the state's economy has changed dramatically in the last year, and I think people certainly need to realize that, and really we haven't heard any answers out there, or any suggestions really as to what they're planning to do for a revenue stream to replace what we're losing in coal lease bonus monies, and certainly the reduction in coal production and the resulting revenues. So I think it's time really that they look at something like this, because there's very few revenue options out there that can generate the kind of money that we're talking about. And so that's certainly a prudent thing, I think, to study these two aspects of revenue and expenditures.
Is it out there on the internet anywhere?
Tax Reform 2000?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can find that. And
Is that on your website?
I believe it is. If it's not, we will make it available off our website. I think I recall something, seeing it out there under Tax Reform 2000, but if not, I'll check on that, Tim. It's a very good study. If you haven't looked at it, it's worth looking at.
Any more questions for Buck? Well, with that, I
Thanks.
thank you for taking the time to visit with us today and tell us about the taxpayers and explain the
Tired.
completely clear, transparent process that is budgeting in this state. So, appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it, guys. Thank you.